Picture this. Right now, as you're watching this video, your mind is processing thousands of thoughts, filtering countless distractions, and making split-second decisions about what deserves your attention. Yet despite all this mental activity, how often do you feel truly in control of your own thoughts? How many times today has your mind wandered to places you didn't want it to go, replayed conversations you wish you could forget, or spiraled into worry about things that may never happen? The uncomfortable truth is that most of us go through life feeling like passengers in our own minds, watching our thoughts drive us wherever they please. But what if I told you that this feeling of mental chaos isn't a personal failing or a sign of weakness? What if the very struggle you're experiencing right now has been understood and solved by both ancient philosophers and modern neuroscientists? Before we dive deeper into this journey of understanding your mind, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you who has helped this channel reach 100 subscribers. Your support means the world to me, and it's incredible to know that we're building a community of people who are genuinely interested in understanding themselves better. If you're new here and this resonates with you, I'd love to have you join us by hitting that subscribe button. We're all on this path of growth together, and your presence makes this community stronger. The ancient Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his personal journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These words, written nearly 2,000 years ago, contain a profound truth that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to fully understand. But here's what's fascinating. Aurelius wasn't just philosophizing from an ivory tower. He was the most powerful man in the world at the time, dealing with plagues, wars, political intrigue, and personal tragedies. Yet he understood something that most of us are still struggling to grasp today. Your mind, as it turns out, is not designed to be controlled in the way you might think. Research from Harvard psychologist Dr. Matthew Killingsworth found that the average person's mind wanders 47% of the time. Nearly half of your waking hours, your attention is somewhere other than where you intended it to be. This isn't a bug in your mental software, it's a feature that helped our ancestors survive. Your brain is constantly scanning for threats, opportunities, and patterns, which means it's naturally restless and distractible. But here's where it gets interesting. The same neuroscience that explains why your mind wanders also reveals how you can work with this tendency rather than against it. Dr. Judson Brewer, a neuroscientist at Brown University, discovered that when we try to forcefully control our thoughts, we actually activate the same brain networks involved in craving and addiction. In other words, the harder you try to not think about something, the more your brain becomes obsessed with it. It's like being told not to think of a pink elephant. Suddenly, pink elephants are all you can see. This is where the wisdom of the Stoics becomes remarkably relevant. Epictetus, who went from being a slave to becoming one of history's most influential philosophers, taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Modern cognitive behavioral therapy has essentially rediscovered this principle. CBT, developed by psychiatrist Aaron Beck in the 1960s, is built on the understanding that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are interconnected, and that by changing our thinking patterns, we can change our emotional experiences. But why is this so difficult to put into practice? Why do we know intellectually that we shouldn't worry about things beyond our control, yet find ourselves lying awake at 3 a.m., replaying every awkward conversation from the past decade? The answer lies in understanding how your brain actually works, not how you think it should work. Your brain operates on what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a system that's active when you're not focused on a specific task. This network is responsible for self-referential thinking, mind-wandering, and what we often experience as our internal monologue. Research shows that an overactive default mode network is associated with depression, anxiety, and rumination. It's the voice in your head that never seems to stop talking, analyzing, judging, and worrying. The ancient Stoics didn't know about neural networks, but they understood this phenomenon intimately. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." He was describing what modern psychology calls cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift your attention and adapt your thinking to new situations. When you're stuck in repetitive thought patterns, you've lost cognitive flexibility. Your mind becomes like a record player with a broken needle, playing the same few bars over and over again. Here's what's truly remarkable. The solution isn't to eliminate these thoughts or to achieve some state of perfect mental control. Instead, it's about changing your relationship with your thoughts entirely. Dr. Stephen Hayes, the developer of acceptance and commitment therapy, describes this as psychological flexibility, the ability to stay present with your experience and take action guided by your values, even when your mind is producing difficult thoughts or emotions. Think about it this way. You wouldn't expect to control the weather, would you? You can't make it stop raining by sheer force of will, but you can learn to dance in the rain, to dress appropriately for different conditions, and to find beauty in storms as well as sunshine. Your thoughts are like weather patterns in your mind. They come and go, they change intensity, and they're influenced by countless factors beyond your direct control. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." Notice that he's not trying to control other people or even his initial reactions to them. Instead, he's preparing his mind to respond wisely rather than reactively. This preparation is what modern psychology calls cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reframe situations in ways that change their emotional impact. Studies show that people who regularly practice cognitive reappraisal have better emotional regulation, lower stress levels, and improved mental health. But here's the key. It's not about positive thinking or pretending everything is fine. It's about seeing situations more clearly and completely. Consider this. When you're stuck in traffic, your initial thought might be, "This is terrible. I'm going to be late. This always happens to me." But cognitive reappraisal might sound like, "This is frustrating, and I can't control the traffic, but I can control how I respond. Maybe I can use this time to listen to something interesting or simply practice being present." You're not denying the frustration. You're expanding your perspective to include other possibilities. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating. When you practice reappraisal, you're literally rewiring your brain. Dr. Kevin Oxner's research at Columbia University shows that cognitive reappraisal increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, while decreasing activity in the amygdala, which processes fear and emotional reactions. Over time, this creates new neural pathways that make wise responding more automatic and emotional reactivity less intense. But here's where many people get stuck. They try to use these techniques to eliminate all negative emotions or difficult thoughts. This is like trying to use an umbrella to stop the rain instead of simply staying dry. Epictetus taught that some things are within our control and others are not. And wisdom lies in focusing our energy only on what we can actually influence. He said, "Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants." In modern terms, this is about understanding the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable. It's the natural response to loss, disappointment, physical discomfort, or challenging circumstances. Suffering, on the other hand, is optional. It's what happens when we resist pain, when we tell ourselves stories about how things should be different, when we fight against reality instead of working skillfully with it. Dr. Marsha Linehan, who developed dialectical behavior therapy, calls this radical acceptance. The willingness to accept reality as it is, not as we wish it were. This doesn't mean being passive or giving up on change. Instead, it means starting from a place of clear seeing rather than wishful thinking. When you accept that your mind naturally produces thousands of thoughts per day, many of them unhelpful or repetitive, you can stop fighting this basic fact of human consciousness and start working with it more skillfully. The Stoics had a beautiful metaphor for this. They compared the mind to a citadel, a fortress that can remain unshaken even when the surrounding territory is under attack. Seneca wrote, "Every change of fortune affects either our person or our possessions. A wise man is prepared for either. Your thoughts and emotions are like weather around this inner citadel. They may be stormy or calm, but they don't have to breach your inner walls." Modern research on attention and mindfulness supports this ancient wisdom. Dr. Wenzel Brewer's studies show that mindfulness meditation literally changes brain structure, increasing grey matter in areas associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation, while decreasing it in the amygdala. But you don't need to meditate for hours to benefit from these insights. Simply learning to observe your thoughts without immediately believing or acting on them is a form of mindfulness. Here's a practical way to think about it. Imagine your thoughts are like cars driving past your house. You don't have to get in every car that passes by. You can watch them come and go, notice which ones catch your attention, and choose which ones are worth following. Most thoughts, when left alone, will simply pass by on their own. It's when we chase after them or try to push them away that they become problematic. This is what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, learning to want what happens rather than demanding that what we want should happen. It sounds paradoxical, but it's actually profoundly liberating. When you stop fighting reality, you free up enormous amounts of mental energy that can be directed toward meaningful action. Dr. Russ Harris, who has written extensively about acceptance and commitment therapy, uses the metaphor of quicksand to explain this principle. When you're caught in quicksand, struggling and fighting only makes you sink faster. The way out is to relax, spread your weight, and move slowly and deliberately. The same is true with difficult thoughts and emotions. The more you struggle against them, the more stuck you become. But what about those times when your mind feels completely out of control? When anxiety spirals into panic? When sadness deepens into despair? When anger explodes into rage? The Stoics face these challenges too. Marcus Aurelius struggled with what we might now recognize as depression. Seneca dealt with chronic illness and political persecution. Epictetus lived through slavery and physical disability. Yet they developed practices that helped them maintain inner freedom, even in the most challenging circumstances. One of their key insights was the power of perspective. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." When you're caught in mental turmoil, you're often either reliving the past or rehearsing the future. But life only happens in the present moment. This isn't just philosophical poetry. It's supported by neuroscience research showing that present moment awareness activates the brain's executive functions and reduces activity in the default mode network. The practice of returning to the present moment doesn't require any special techniques or equipment. It can be as simple as noticing 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This grounds you in sensory experience rather than mental narrative. It's a way of stepping out of the story your mind is telling and into the reality of this moment. Dr. Daniel Siegel, a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA, describes this as name it to tame it. The simple act of labeling your emotional experience reduces its intensity. When you notice anxiety and simply think, "Anxiety is here," rather than "I am anxious," you create space between yourself and the emotion. You're not the anxiety, you're the one observing it. This observation is what the Stoics called the view from above, the ability to step back and see your situation from a broader perspective. Marcus Aurelius regularly practiced imagining himself from the perspective of the cosmos, seeing his problems as tiny specks in the vastness of space and time. Modern psychology calls this psychological distance, and research shows it improves decision-making, reduces emotional reactivity, and increases wisdom. But perhaps the most powerful insight from both ancient philosophy and modern psychology is this: you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes thoughts. Dr. Dan Siegel uses the metaphor of the wheel of awareness. Imagine your consciousness as a wheel, with your thoughts, emotions, and sensations around the rim, and your observing awareness as the hub. No matter how chaotic things get around the rim, the hub remains still and spacious. This awareness is what allows for choice. Between stimulus and response, as Viktor Frankl observed, there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom. The Stoics understood that this space, this pause between what happens and how you respond, is where wisdom lives. It's where you can choose courage over fear, compassion over judgment, acceptance over resistance. Epictetus taught his students to ask themselves, is this something that's up to me or not? This simple question cuts through mental complexity and returns you to what actually matters. Your thoughts about a situation are up to you. Your response is up to you. Your values and how you choose to live them are up to you. Everything else, other people's opinions, the weather, the past, the future, is not up to you. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. The Stoics were some of the most engaged and effective people in history. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire. Seneca was a successful playwright and advisor. Epictetus taught students who went on to influence the world. But they understood that true power comes from focusing your energy where it can actually make a difference. Modern research on what psychologists call locus of control supports this ancient wisdom. People with an internal locus of control, those who believe their actions can influence outcomes, are happier, more resilient, and more successful than those with an external locus of control, who believe their lives are primarily determined by outside forces. But the key is having an accurate sense of what you can and cannot control. Dr. Albert Ellis, one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy, identified what he called masturbation, the tendency to tell yourself that things must be different than they are. I must be perfect. People must treat me fairly. Life must be easy. These musts create suffering because they set up a conflict between reality and your demands about how reality should be. The Stoics had a different approach. They practiced what they called the discipline of assent, carefully examining their judgments and beliefs before accepting them as true. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." How often do you create suffering by believing thoughts that aren't actually true or helpful? Consider this. When you think, "I can't handle this," is that actually true? You've handled everything life has thrown at you so far. You're still here, still breathing, still capable of growth and change. When you think, "This is terrible," are you describing reality or expressing a preference? When you think, "I should be further along by now," compared to whom? According to what timeline? These questions aren't meant to invalidate your experience or minimize real challenges. They're meant to help you see the difference between what's actually happening and the stories you tell yourself about what's happening. Dr. Byron Katie, who developed a method of inquiry called The Work, suggests asking 4 questions about any stressful thought. Is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? Who would you be without that thought? This kind of inquiry is what the Stoics practiced daily. They understood that most human suffering comes not from external circumstances, but from our judgments about those circumstances. This is why Marcus Aurelius could write, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." But what about when life genuinely is difficult? When you're facing real loss, real pain, real challenges? The Stoics weren't naive optimists who pretended everything was fine. They were realists who understood that difficulty is an inevitable part of human existence. Seneca lost his father, was exiled from Rome, and eventually was forced to commit suicide by the Emperor Nero. Yet he wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." This is where the concept of post-traumatic growth becomes relevant. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun discovered that many people don't just recover from traumatic experiences, they actually grow stronger, wiser, and more resilient. They develop deeper relationships, a greater appreciation for life, increased personal strength, and a clearer sense of what truly matters. The key factor in post-traumatic growth isn't the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. When you can find purpose in your struggles, when you can see how challenges contribute to your growth and wisdom, when you can use your experiences to help others, suffering becomes transformative rather than merely destructive. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." This is the essence of Stoic philosophy and modern resilience research. You may not be able to control what happens to you, but you always have some degree of choice in how you respond. This choice is what makes you human. Animals react instinctively to their environment. Humans have the unique ability to pause, reflect, and choose responses that align with their values rather than their impulses. Dr. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, describes this as the difference between System 1 thinking, fast, automatic, emotional, and System 2 thinking, slow, deliberate, rational. Most of the time, you're operating on System 1, which is efficient but not always wise. The practice of mental discipline is about learning to engage System 2 when it matters most. The Stoics developed specific practices to strengthen this capacity for wise response. They practiced negative visualization, imagining loss or difficulty not to be pessimistic, but to appreciate what they had and prepare mentally for challenges. They practiced the discipline of perception, looking at situations from multiple angles to see them more clearly. They practiced the discipline of action, focusing on what they could do rather than what they wished would happen. Modern psychology has validated many of these practices. Gratitude exercises, which are similar to negative visualization, improve mood, relationships, and life satisfaction. Cognitive reframing, which parallels the discipline of perception, reduces anxiety and depression. Values-based action, which mirrors the discipline of action, increases meaning and fulfillment. But perhaps the most important practice is simply learning to be present with your experience without immediately trying to fix, change, or escape it. Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who brought mindfulness into mainstream medicine, defines mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. This isn't about achieving some special state of consciousness. It's about being fully here for your life as it actually is. When you're present with your thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them, something remarkable happens. You begin to see that they're temporary, that they arise and pass away like clouds in the sky. You realize that you are not your anxiety, your anger, your sadness, or your fear. You are the awareness that can observe all of these experiences with compassion and wisdom. This awareness is what the Stoics called the ruling faculty, the part of you that can choose how to respond regardless of circumstances. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." Not because the present is always pleasant, but because it's the only place where you have any real power. As we come to the end of our exploration together, I want you to consider this. The very fact that you're here, listening to these ideas, thinking about your relationship with your own mind, is evidence of your capacity for growth and change. You're not broken or flawed because you struggle with difficult thoughts and emotions. You're human, and the human mind is complex, creative, and sometimes chaotic. The path to mental freedom isn't about achieving perfect control over your thoughts. It's about developing a wiser, more compassionate relationship with your inner experience. It's about learning to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be chosen for, to find meaning in difficulty and joy in simplicity. Remember that this is a practice, not a destination. Some days you'll feel centered and wise. Other days you'll feel scattered and reactive. Both are part of the human experience. The goal isn't to eliminate the difficult days, but to meet them with greater skill and self-compassion. As Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. In the context of your relationship with your own mind, the best response to mental chaos is not to become chaotic yourself, but to remain centered, curious, and kind. Your thoughts may be wild and unpredictable, but you, the awareness that observes them, can remain steady and wise. You have within you right now everything you need to begin this journey of mental freedom. Not perfect control, but something far more valuable, the capacity to meet whatever arises with presence, wisdom, and grace. And in that meeting, in that choice to respond rather than react, you discover that you are far more powerful and resilient than you ever imagined. The ancient Stoics and modern scientists agree on this. You cannot control your mind in the way you might control a machine, but you can learn to work with it skillfully, compassionately, and wisely. And in that learning, you find not just peace of mind, but a deeper understanding of what it means to be fully, authentically human.